In the year 65, a group of soldiers rode up to a villa outside Rome and told the man inside that the emperor wanted him dead. Not arrested, not put on trial. Dead. And preferably by his own hand tonight. The man was Seneca, tutor to Nero, one of the richest men in the empire, and by then an old man who'd already survived exile, poverty, and one previous death sentence he talked his way out of. According to the historian Tacitus, he didn't scream. He didn't beg. He asked for a moment, called for his will, and when the soldiers refused to let him write it, he turned to his friends and said, more or less, that since he couldn't leave them money, he'd leave them the one thing that actually mattered, the example of how he lived. Then he opened his veins. You can read that story and decide it's just Roman theater. Everybody performing composure for the history books, maybe. But there's another way to read it, and it's the one that actually matters for you and me. Seneca wasn't calm that night because he was cold, or because he didn't love his life. He was calm, I think, because he'd been rehearsing this exact scene in his head for decades, long before the soldiers ever showed up. Here's the problem. Most of us are walking around with, though, and it's not really about death at all. It's about everything smaller than death. The layoff email, the diagnosis, the relationship that ends without warning on a random Tuesday. Most people go through their entire lives refusing to even glance at the bad outcome, like imagining it might summon it. So when it actually happens, and something always eventually happens, it lands like a punch nobody saw coming from an angle they never once considered. The shock isn't just the event. Half the pain is the shock itself. And look, I get why we avoid it. There's this idea floating around. Self-help culture, therapy speak, whatever you want to call it, that thinking about bad things is basically inviting them in. Stay positive. Manifest good outcomes. Don't give negativity a seat at the table. It sounds comforting. It is comforting, actually, right up until the exact moment it stops working, which tends to be precisely the moment you needed it most. Nobody really tells you what happens on the other side of that approach, though. The person who spent years refusing to picture the bad outcome doesn't handle it better when it finally shows up. In my experience, they handle it worse because their mind has zero prior experience with the shape of the thing. It's a stranger. And the Stoics, Seneca especially, landed on something almost the opposite of modern positivity culture. It sounds a little grim on first read. Then you actually try it. Seneca wrote about this directly to his friend Lucilius, in a letter written just after a great fire had leveled the city of Lyon overnight. A whole city, gone, practically while people slept. He wrote, "Nothing ought to be unexpected by us. Our minds should be sent forward in advance to meet all problems. And we should consider not what is wont to happen, but what can happen. Read that twice if you need to. Not what usually happens, what can happen." That's the hinge the entire technique turns on. This wasn't some abstract exercise for Seneca either. In that same letter, he gets almost uncomfortably specific. He wrote, "We should therefore reflect upon all contingencies, and should fortify our minds against the evils which may possibly come. Exile, the torture of disease, wars, shipwreck. We must think on these, not vaguely, not bad things might happen. Oh well, sit down, actually walk through it. Exile, illness, war, losing everything on a boat that sinks somewhere off the coast." And I'll admit, the first time I actually tried this myself, deliberately sitting there imagining the thing I was most afraid of, It felt a little morbid. Kind of ridiculous. Honestly, sitting alone, doing this on purpose, but something strange happens after a few minutes of it. The fear sort of deflates. Not gone, just smaller, almost familiar, like a room you've already walked through once in the dark, so the second time through isn't nearly as frightening. Epictetus took the same idea somewhere far more uncomfortable, and honestly, somewhere a lot of modern audiences would push back on. He'd been a slave before he became a philosopher. Watched people he cared about get sold off or die without warning. And he had zero patience left for illusions about permanence. In the Enchiridion, he wrote, "If you kiss your child or your wife, say that you only kiss things which are human, and thus you will not be disturbed if either of them dies." That line makes people uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable the first time I read it, sitting there thinking he can't possibly mean it the way it sounds. He's not telling you to love your family less or to hold back. What he's actually saying, I think, is love them with full awareness that they're mortal, not with the quiet, unexamined assumption that they'll always just be there tomorrow. Because that second kind of love, the assuming kind, is exactly what gets shattered when reality shows up uninvited. He goes further, actually, in a line I think is the clearest statement of this entire technique in either of these two writers. Epictetus wrote, "Let death and exile and all other things which appear terrible be daily before your eyes, but chiefly death, and you will never entertain any abject thought, nor too eagerly covet anything." Daily. Not once. Not some crisis exercise you cram in the week before a scary surgery. Every day. A little. On purpose. So, the terrifying things stop being strangers. There's a name for this now. In psychology. Negative visualization, some call it. Defensive pessimism, depending which researcher you ask. And the odd finding is that people who practice it regularly tend to report less anxiety overall, not more, which is backwards from what you'd expect, until you actually sit with why. Fear mostly lives in the unrehearsed, the unexamined corner of your mind. Drag the scary thing into daylight. Look right at it, and it tends to lose a chunk of its power just from being looked at directly. So, what does this actually look like in practice? If you're not a Roman philosopher, journaling in your 70s, simpler than it sounds, honestly. A few minutes, maybe in the morning, maybe right before bed. Pick one thing that genuinely scares you. Losing the job, losing someone, your health going sideways, whatever it happens to be for you, and let yourself sit inside it for a minute, not spiral, not panic. Just look at it. What would that actually feel like? What would the next morning look like? What would you still have left standing? Even then, it's a strange kind of practice because it doesn't remove 1 ounce of danger from your actual life. Nothing about imagining a shipwreck stops the storm from forming. Seneca still died on Nero's orders, regardless of every letter he'd written about it years earlier. Epictetus reportedly walked with a permanent limp for the rest of his life from an injury his own master gave him. Apparently just to test whether the philosophy held up under real pain. Technique was never about avoiding hardship. It was about not being a total stranger to it when it finally introduced itself. That's the actual difference it makes if you're honest with yourself and actually try it. Not immunity. Nobody gets that, stoic or otherwise. Just a head start. The bad news still hurts, still lands hard. But it doesn't also come with that extra layer of total disorientation. The part where your mind has nothing to grab onto because it's never once let itself go there before. You've already been there in a small way. It's not some stranger's face staring back at you anymore. If any of this landed for you, subscribe to Stoic Mind. Every week we go straight to the actual letters and texts, not secondhand summaries of secondhand summaries. And maybe try this tonight. Just once, honestly. Pick one thing you're quietly afraid of. Sit with it for 2 minutes, no more. See what's still standing on the other side of it. Until next time, stay steadfast.